"Those are my kidnapped children!" she screamed, and the entire world seemed to stop to watch my moral lynching while I clutched the chubby fingers of Oliver and Maya. The scream sliced through the mall's icy air conditioning like a rusty blade, turning my castle of perfection into a pile of rubble in exactly 3 seconds. I, Madison, the woman who sacrificed every fiber of her being to build a family, stood there paralyzed, feeling cold sweat run down my spine as that stranger with deranged eyes lunged toward us. She wasn't looking at the designer clothes I had chosen so carefully. She was staring at the small, almost imperceptible birthmark near Oliver's left eye. In that instant, the mall floor was no longer polished granite. It was quicksand. I smelled her cheap perfume mixed with the stench of my own desperation. That woman, Charlotte, had the strength of a wounded animal, and as security guards closed in, the only thing I could think of was my husband's face. Michael! The man I idolized. The man who placed those babies in my arms in silk baskets as if they were divine gifts, while I cried over my infertility on the bathroom floor at home. I remembered every detail of the day they arrived. Michael walked through the door wearing that savior smile, saying that fate had finally smiled upon us through a wonderful intermediary, a woman named Dana. "A saint, Madison," he said, showing me documents that looked more real than reality itself. Dana was the embodiment of kindness, perfectly aligned gray hair, a gentle voice that smelled of cinnamon cookies and promises of a bright future. She claimed to be the director of a shelter, a 55-year-old woman who devoted her life to finding homes for the helpless. What a macabre joke! While I hugged her in gratitude, she was counting the stacks of cash Michael slipped under the table. I had been made a fool with a ribbon tied neatly around my head. As Charlotte screamed my children's real names in the middle of the corridor, I felt the bitter taste of Michael's betrayal rising in my throat. He hadn't just bought children, he had financed human trafficking on a whim disguised as love. Love? No. That was ego. He wanted a happy wife, so he wouldn't have to deal with my grief. And for that, he destroyed another woman's life. And now, as I watched the police arrive, and the flashes of cell phones around me blinded my eyes, the image of Dana, the kind grandmother, twisted in my mind into the face of a monster. She was a hunter. She stalked parks, waited for the exact second mothers like Charlotte looked away, and like a vulture, she carried off the tenderest flesh. But the final stab, the one that truly made me want to reduce the world to ashes, wasn't even the scandal at the mall. It was discovering that while I was living this nightmare, Michael already had a contingency plan. He had Harper, the mistress, that soulless woman who now, with the audacity of the universe, tried to worm her way into my pain. Harper had the nerve to call me, to show up at my door wanting to share responsibilities because Michael, the coward, the liar, was collapsing under the weight of his own farce. Michael got sick. The stress of being exposed broke him, and he began acting like a petulant child, and Harper, with that infuriating air of superiority, wanted me to clean up his mess. She wanted me, the betrayed wife, the mother about to lose her children to the justice system, to hold the hand of the man who destroyed me while she decided what he should eat. A visceral urge to feel Harper's neck between my hands seized me every time she suggested that we needed to be adults for Michael's sake. Which Michael? The trafficker? The adulterer? The fury burning inside me was stronger than the fear of prison. I looked at Charlotte, now crying on the floor, supported by police officers, and I felt no hatred for her. I felt a mirror. We were both victims of the same web of lies built by Dana and fed by my husband's money. I had been living in a house of cards, and Charlotte's breath had just knocked it all down. The humiliation of being taken to the police station under society's disapproving gaze was only the beginning. Michael tried to call me 17 times, but all I could think about was how he had the audacity to let me hold those children, to let me sing them lullabies, knowing they belonged in someone else's arms. He made me an accomplice to a heinous crime without my knowledge. And now he wanted to come back? He wanted forgiveness. He wanted me to accept Harper taking care of his medication while I decided whether I was going to jail or to an asylum. Dana, that serpent wrapped in wool, was probably already in another state, hunting her next victim, while I stood here at the epicenter of chaos. But I wasn't going down alone. If my life had collapsed because of a tiny mark near a boy's eye, I would make sure that Michael's empire of lies and Dana's trafficking network burned with me. I looked at the detective, wiped the mascara-streaked tears from my face, and made a decision. I would not be the passive victim of this real-life Mexican soap opera. I would destroy Michael. I would find Dana. And somehow, I would face Charlotte, not as the kidnapper the world thought I was, but as the woman who had also been robbed of her sanity. With every step I took down the station hallway, sarcasm became my only shield. Of course, Michael, you did it for love, I thought, laughing hysterically inside. Just like Harper must be feeding you soup out of charity, and not because she wants a slice of the inheritance you haven't spent on lawyers yet. I was surrounded by wolves, but they had forgotten that I had spent the last few years raising 2 lions. The game was only beginning, and if they thought I would surrender to despair and accept the role of the betrayed, submissive wife, they were terribly mistaken. I would make every one of them bleed, starting with the saint, Dana, and ending with my dying husband's bloated ego. The pain in my chest was a forge, and what was emerging from it was no longer Madison, the devoted family woman. It was something far more dangerous. The air in the police station smelled of burnt coffee and mold, a violent contrast to the French vanilla aroma I used to keep in my living room. I was sitting on an uncomfortable metal chair, feeling every joint in my body protest, but the physical pain was a whisper compared to the deafening scream echoing inside my head. I could still hear Charlotte's sobs in the room next door. That sound pierced me like a spear, because every one of her tears was proof of my cursed ignorance. I, the great Madison, the woman who prided herself on having everything under control, had been the central piece in a chess game played by monsters. And at the center of that board was my husband, Michael, the man I thought loved me enough to move mountains, but who in truth only moved money out of our bank account to buy human lives. Suddenly, the waiting room door opened, and the click of high heels against the linoleum floor made every muscle in my body tense. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The perfume was too sweet, invasive, the kind of fragrance that tries to hide a rotten soul. Harper walked in, as if she were strutting down a runway, not entering a criminal investigation unit. She carried a designer handbag that Michael had probably paid for with whatever money was left over from the investment in the twins. She stopped in front of me, adjusted her sunglasses over her impeccably made-up face, and had the audacity to sigh, a sigh dripping with condescension that made me nauseous. "Madison, dear, you look dreadful," she said, in that velvety voice she used to manipulate Michael. I came as soon as I heard. Michael is in a terrible state at home. His blood pressure shot up, so high the doctor had to be called. He won't stop asking for you, but given the circumstances, I thought it best to come personally and take care of things. I looked at her, and for a second, the world turned red. I felt the pulse in my temples, like a war drum. Take care of things? That woman, who slept with my husband while I changed the diapers of children he had bought from a trafficker, wanted to take care of what exactly? I stood up slowly, rage giving me a cold elegance I didn't know I possessed. I didn't scream. Screaming is for the weak. I simply stepped closer until our faces were inches apart, close enough for her to see the abyss in my eyes. "Harper, if you take one more step toward me, I swear on the life I thought I had that I will rip out every strand of that bleached hair of yours and shove it down Michael's throat." My voice was a lethal whisper. "You come here talking about responsibilities? You want to share the load now that the ship is sinking? Michael is sick. Let him die. Let him rot in the hell he built himself. And you can go with him, keeping him company on the way." She stepped back, her mask of confidence flickering for a fraction of a second. "You're hysterical, Madison. That's understandable. But think logically. This scandal will destroy the company's reputation. We need a united front. I'm taking care of him because you are, obviously, busy being investigated for kidnapping. I just want to help manage the crisis." Manage the crisis? I let out a dry, sarcastic laugh that echoed through the peeling walls of the station. "You are the crisis, Harper. You and that pathetic man I called my husband. You think this is about public relations? There's a woman in the room next door whose heart was ripped out years ago because of a hag named Dana, and I was the one holding that heart in my hands thinking it was mine. And you want to talk to me about a company? About reputation?" I turned away, ignoring her presence as if she were a bothersome insect, but the thought of Dana wouldn't leave me. Dana, the 55-year-old woman who hugged me on the day of the delivery. I could picture her face now, stripped of its mask of kindness, I remembered how she spoke about the twins, calling them little angels who needed a fresh start. She wasn't an adoption intermediary. She was an elite predator. She knew exactly which mothers to watch, which parks to frequent. She must have seen Charlotte, maybe in a moment of exhaustion, maybe while she turned to grab a bottle, and in seconds, Dana destroyed a bloodline. And Michael was the fuel for that engine of pain. I sat down again, feeling the weight of reality crush my lungs. The police had already taken my initial statements, but now they were cross-checking the data. The contract Michael had given me was a cheap forgery in the eyes of the experts, but to me, in my desperate thirst to be a mother, it had been my birth certificate as a complete woman. What irony! I became whole through someone else's void. The lead detective, a man with tired eyes named Miller, called me back into the interrogation room. Harper tried to follow, claiming to be the family's personal assistant, but I simply gave Miller a look that said everything. He blocked her entrance with a firm arm. "Only Mrs. Thompson," he said. Seeing the defeat on Harper's face as the door closed was the only moment of pleasure I had that fateful day. Inside, the air was even heavier. Miller laid out several photos on the table. They weren't photos of the twins. They were photos of other children. "Mrs. Thompson, we need you to be very specific about your contact with Dana Vance. We've tracked her across 3 different states. She uses false identities, but the modus operandi is always the same. She finds desperate or greedy husbands willing to pay fortunes for a shortcut through adoption bureaucracy. Your husband, Petty Michael Thompson, paid her the equivalent of a luxury home for those twins." The name, Petty, hit me like a punch. I had always known that was his middle name, but it had never felt so appropriate, so small, so insignificant. "I didn't know about the payment," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "I thought they were procedural fees. He told me the process was private, that everything was legalized by lawyers he knew." I was an idiot, detective. A complete idiot. "Were you deceived, or did you choose not to look too closely?" Miller asked, not with cruelty, but with a technical curiosity that hurt even more. I closed my eyes. The question hung in the air. Deep down, hadn't that ease raised some kind of alarm? But how do you question a miracle? When you spent years crying over negative pregnancy tests, you don't question it when someone finally places happiness in your arms. You just grab it. "I wanted to be a mother," I whispered. "That's all." "Well, the real mother is out there. And she has proof. Photos, DNA that's already been requested, and that birthmark, which is a rare genetic trait in her family. The twins aren't yours, Madison. They never were." The final blow. Even though I already knew, hearing it from an authority felt like the guillotine falling. But before I could collapse, a thought struck me. If Michael paid Dana, did he know where the children came from? Or was he deceived like I was? No. Michael is a businessman. He doesn't invest in anything without knowing the source. He knew. He knew those children had been torn from someone. And he let me love them, knowing I was building my life on a field of emotional corpses. The anger returned, but this time it wasn't sarcastic. It was cold, calculated fury. If Michael wanted me to take care of him, if Harper wanted to share responsibilities, I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would go back to that house, not as the devoted wife, but as a Trojan horse. I would uncover every cent Michael had sent to Dana. I would track that woman through the financial records I knew exactly where he kept hidden. "Detective," I said, wiping my face and staring at Miller with a determination that made him lean back slightly in his chair. "I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything you need. But I want one thing in return. I want to speak to Charlotte. Alone. Before she takes the children. That's against protocol, Mrs. Thompson. Protocols were broken when my husband bought human beings like cattle. I shot back. I raised those boys for 3 years. I know every fear they have, every food they hate, the way they need to be rocked to sleep. Charlotte is their biological mother, and she deserves her children back, but they don't know her. If you just throw them into her arms right now, you'll traumatize them even more. I'm the only bridge that can make this less painful for them." Miller hesitated, but he saw the logic in my pain. He nodded slightly. As I left the room, Harper was still there, furiously typing on her phone. When she saw me, she came toward me with a fake smile. Michael called again. He said that if you sign a confession saying you organize everything, he can use his influence to get you out of jail in a few months. He says it's the only way to save the family. I stopped and looked at her, feeling a deep disgust. Michael was trying to throw me to the lions to save himself. He wanted me to take the blame for the trafficking, so he could walk away as the husband betrayed by his wife's madness to be a mother. And Harper, the loyal mistress, was there to make sure the plan worked. "Tell Michael," I said, my voice sounding like cracking ice, "that I'm going home. But not to take care of him. Tell him I'm going to reclaim what's mine. And Harper, get ready, because when I'm done with the two of you, you'll wish Dana had kidnapped you too." I walked out of the police station under the blazing sun, my head pounding, but the plan already taking shape. I had to be fast. Dana wouldn't stay put for long, and Michael was a rat who, when cornered, would bite any hand, including mine. I had to get to the documents before Harper or his lawyers wiped the Home Office clean. My life as I knew it was over, but my life as an Avenger was just beginning. I would give Charlotte her children back, but I would carry Michael's and Dana's heads on a platter. I walked into the house feeling as if the air itself was saturated with the stench of betrayal. That mansion, which I had decorated down to every last detail to be the perfect refuge, now felt like a luxury mausoleum. Every framed photo of the twins was a nail in my coffin, and I moved through the hallways with the coldness of someone who has nothing left to lose. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went straight to Michael's office, the sanctuary where he engineered his master moves. But I wasn't alone. Harper was there, leaning against the mahogany desk, holding a crystal glass filled with my husband's expensive whiskey, acting as if she owned that miserable sandcastle. "You really don't give up, do you, Madison?" she said, swirling the ice in her glass. "Michael is lying down, sedated by the doctor, and I received clear orders not to let anyone touch his files. Especially you, now that you've become a legal risk." I took a step forward, and the chandelier's light reflected in my eyes in a way that wiped the smile off her face. "Step away from that desk, Harper. Now, or I'll use that whiskey glass of yours to redesign your face. I'm no longer the understanding wife. I'm the woman you helped destroy, and I promise you I'm not afraid to sink to your level." She tried to keep her composure, but she saw I meant it. The sarcasm I had always used as a shield had turned into a weapon. She backed away with a snort and dropped into the leather armchair, watching my every move. I began rummaging through the drawers, flinging papers into the air, dismantling Michael's obsessive organization. I knew he kept a fake safe behind the law encyclopedia. When I opened it, I found more than cash. I found a black folder with the name Dana embossed on it. Inside, the truth was even more sordid than I had imagined. It wasn't just my children. There was a list. Photos of children of different ages, all annotated with delivery prices and documentation costs. Michael wasn't just a client. He was the angel investor in Dana's network. He had injected capital into her business to expand operations into other states. My husband, the man I slept beside, was the partner of a human trafficker. He facilitated the theft of dozens of lives to ensure that his own family dream could be maintained without the delays of the law. "Did you know about this?" I asked, throwing the folder in Harper's face. "Did you know the money he spends on you comes from kidnapping children from parks and malls?" Harper flipped through the pages with a disdain that made my stomach churn. "Money is money, Madison. You enjoyed the trips, the clothes, the jewelry. Don't try to play the moralist now. You wanted to be a mother. He gave you children. The method hardly matters when the result is what you asked for." I lunged at her. It wasn't planned. It was pure instinct. My hands closed around the collar of her silk blouse, and I slammed her against the wall with a strength I didn't even know I had. The method matters when it involves ripping a child from a mother's arms. Charlotte spent years dying inside while I lived a fantasy financed by crime. "You're trash, just like him." I let her go in disgust and returned to the documents. Among the promissory notes, I found an address. A country house registered to a shell company just 2 hours away. That was where Dana operated. That was where she hid the merchandise before distributing it to rich, unscrupulous buyers like Michael. I stuffed everything into my bag, including a flash drive hidden at the bottom of the folder. At that moment, the office door opened and Michael appeared. He looked like a ghost of the man I once knew. Pale, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling as he tried to hide them in the pockets of his silk pajamas. "Madison, please," he began, his voice weak and manipulative. "I did it for us. I saw how you suffered. I couldn't bear your pain with every negative test result. Dana was the only one who promised a quick solution. I didn't know that she took the children like that at first." "Liar!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the entire house. "You knew from the very first cent you transferred to her. You saw the reports, Michael. You saw the photos. You chose the twins as if you were choosing a car from a catalog. This one has a little mark near the eye, Petty. It'll be easy to identify if she gets lost. You must have told Dana, and you loved it, didn't you? A brand differentiator." He dropped to his knees, trying to reach for my hands. "We can fix this. I have lawyers. We can claim we were deceived by Dana, that we're victims. Charlotte can receive a settlement. We can buy her silence. Just help me destroy this evidence, Madison. For our history." I looked at him with such deep contempt that I felt like vomiting. That man wasn't my husband. He was a parasite trying to feed on my last drop of loyalty. "For our history, Michael, I'll make sure you never see daylight again except through prison bars. And as for you, Harper, I hope you enjoy taking care of sick men, because all that will be left of Michael is a wasting body in prison and bank accounts frozen by the courts." I left the office, ignoring Michael's screams and Harper's threats. I had a destination. Before handing everything over to Detective Miller, I needed to do one last thing. I needed to face the monster face to face. I grabbed the car and drove as if the devil himself were on my heels. I felt no fear. Fear had died in them all. What remained was a thirst for justice, so vast it barely fit in my chest. I arrived at the country house late at night. It was isolated, surrounded by dense trees. I saw a light on upstairs. I parked far away and approached on foot, feeling dry leaves crackle under my shoes. Through the window I saw her. Dana! She was sitting at the table, calmly drinking tea while reviewing some papers. She looked exactly like the kindly old woman who handed me Oliver and Maya, but now, under the cold light of the lamp, I could see the chill in her eyes. She was an accountant of souls. I didn't call the police right away. I wanted her to know it was me. I wanted to see the moment her mask fell. I entered through the back door, which was ajar, and walked silently into the kitchen. When she noticed me, she didn't flinch. She simply smiled, that grandmotherly smile that now sent shivers down my spine. "Madison, dear, what a surprise. Michael told me you were unstable, but I didn't think it would come to this. You should be at home, crying over the loss of your children, not here, ruining the scheme that guaranteed your happiness for 3 years. My happiness was a crime, Dana, and Michael is no longer your protective partner. He's a coward who's about to turn you in to save his own skin." Dana let out a short, icy laugh. "Michael won't turn in anything. He's as buried in this as I am. And you, Madison, you're just a frustrated mother having a psychotic break. Who's going to believe you? I have documents for everything. I didn't come here to argue, Dana. I came to tell you that Detective Miller is 10 minutes away with the evidence I took from Michael's safe. The flash drive with the complete list of children, the receipts, the transport routes. It's over." For the first time, I saw raw panic cross that woman's face. She jumped to her feet, knocking over her teacup. "You're insane. You're going to destroy the lives of dozens of families who are now happy with those children. You think you're a heroine? You're the villain who's going to take children away from parents who love them. I'm the woman who's going to give peace back to the Charlottes of this world," I replied, hearing the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. "And if those families love those children, they'll understand that love doesn't come from theft." Dana tried to run for the exit, but I grabbed her. We fought on the kitchen floor amid shattered plates and the dust of a life of crimes. I didn't care about the scratches on my face or the pain in my arms. I held her with all the fury of a mother who discovered her nest was a trap. When the police stormed the house and red and blue lights flooded the room, I finally let her go. I walked out of the house and sat on the hood of the car, watching Dana being handcuffed. Detective Miller approached me, taking the bag of documents. "You were brave, Madison, but what you did was far too dangerous. Dangerous is what I lived for the last 3 years, Detective. The rest is just cleanup." But the cleanup wasn't finished. I still had to face the greatest battle of all. I had to look into the eyes of the woman to whom I had, indirectly, caused the greatest pain imaginable. I had to hand the twins over to Charlotte and find a way to say goodbye to the beings I loved most, knowing that to them I would go from mother to a confused, painful memory. And I still had one final reckoning with the man lying in our marital bed, believing that money and a mistress would save him from the ashes. The sun rose with a sickly pallor over the city, but for me, it was the first real day in years. I didn't return to the mansion. I went straight to the child protection unit where the children were being held under temporary custody. In the hallway, the silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of my own footsteps, each one seeming to weigh a ton. In the distance, I saw Charlotte. She was sitting on a wooden bench, her hands clasped together, her gaze lost somewhere between the past and the present. She was no longer the hysterical woman from the mall. She was an exhausted mother who had finally reached the end of a marathon of nightmares. I approached slowly. The sarcasm I once wore as armor had dissolved, leaving only the raw flesh of my own guilt. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed, a spark of hatred and fear flashing there. I didn't speak right away. I simply pulled two small objects from my bag, the worn teddy bears Oliver and Maya couldn't sleep without. "Charlotte," I began, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I know that forgiveness for what I did, even unknowingly, doesn't exist in this world. I came to give you what no one gave you all these years, the truth and the bridge to them." She took the teddy bears with trembling hands, pressing them to her chest as if they were the children themselves. "Why did you take them?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you allow that man to do this?" "Because I was selfish. I wanted so badly to fill my own emptiness that I closed my eyes to the cracks in Michael's story. But I destroyed his world today. He and the woman he kept in the shadows, Harper, are being taken in right now. I handed over every receipt, every message, every piece of proof that he financed the monster who stole them from you." We stood there, two women bound by a tragedy engineered by greedy men and a diabolical old woman. I told her everything. I told her about the small birthmark near Oliver's eye. I told her how Maya likes to hear stories about dragons before closing her eyes. I was handing her the instruction manual to her children's hearts. It was the most painful moment of my life, feeling my role as a mother slip away as I transferred it, piece by piece, to their rightful owner. Meanwhile, Michael's empire was collapsing like a burning house of cards. Harper, the opportunistic mistress, tried one last desperate move. She showed up at the police station with an expensive lawyer, trying to claim she was merely an employee and that I, driven by jealousy, was fabricating evidence. But she forgot about the flash drive. On it, there weren't just names of children, there were photos of Harper in meetings with Dana. She wasn't just the mistress. She was the network's public relations arm, the one who cleaned up digital trails and ensured the money flowed without raising suspicion. Watching Harper being handcuffed, her face smeared with tears and her First Lady pose shattered, was the dramatic vindication I needed. Michael, for his part, attempted social suicide, faking a total nervous breakdown to be committed to a psychiatric clinic and avoid a regular prison sentence. But Detective Miller was relentless. With the evidence I provided of his secret Cayman Islands account, the judge denied any special treatment. He was going to rot in a cold cell, feeling in his own skin the isolation Charlotte had endured for all those years. The family man was now just inmate number 4052. The weeks that followed blurred into courtrooms and sensational headlines. "The mother who bought and the mother who cried," the newspapers read. But within the four walls of Charlotte's home, a new reality was being built. In a gesture of generosity I never expected, Charlotte allowed me to take part in the transition. She understood that, to the children, I was the only security they had ever known. If she ripped them away from me abruptly, she would only be completing the kidnapping Dana had begun. We did something unusual. I used what was left of my personal inheritance, the part Michael couldn't touch, to buy a smaller house just a few blocks from where Charlotte lived. We created a system. I was no longer the mother, but I was Aunt Maddie. Charlotte reclaimed lost time with saint-like patience, and I learned to accept my role as support, wiping away tears I had helped cause. The glorious ending wasn't a gala or a new marriage. It was a Sunday afternoon, 6 months later. Charlotte, and I were in the garden, sitting in rocking chairs as we watched Oliver and Maya run across the lawn. They were safe. They knew who their mother was, and they knew they were loved by two women who had survived hell. Dana was sentenced to 120 years in prison. She would never again see the light of day except through barbed wire. Michael and Harper entered a cycle of mutual accusations behind bars, destroying each other until nothing remained but hatred. I looked at Charlotte and gave a sardonic smile, remembering how my perfect life had collapsed in that mall. "You know, Charlotte," I said, pouring her a glass of iced tea, "I thought my life had ended when you screamed in that mall. But for the first time, I feel like I can breathe without lying to myself." Charlotte touched my hand, a simple gesture of peace. We were both victims, Madison, but we're the only ones who stayed standing to tell the story. I didn't have biological children, and I lost the ones I thought were mine. But I gained something greater, redemption. And as the twins laughed in the distance, I realized that true love isn't bought, bargained for, or, above all, stolen. It is rebuilt on the ashes of truth, no matter how painful that truth may be. The life of Madison Thompson, the perfect wife, died. But the life of Madison, the woman who faced the world to do what was right, was just beginning, head held high and heart finally at peace.